Welcome to the Strategy Mob Podcast. Tune in for everything you need to know to stay in the know regarding the automotive industry. Here's your host, Jason Harris.
Hey, what's going on, Podcast Nation? It is Jason Harris here, and thank you for joining me on another episode of Strategy Mob. Today, I have a very special guest. I have Mr. Jeff Schuster with me today, and I had the opportunity to listen to Jeff speak recently at the JD Talk Auto Conference, which was a virtual event, and boy, he had some amazing things to say, so I'm so glad you're able to join us today, Jeff.
I'm really glad to be with you. Look forward to our discussion.
Hey, I know we're going to get deep into talking about EVs. We're going to kind of talk about maybe what the next couple months look like for the industry. But before we get super deep into this, I thought we'd kick off today's podcast with a little origin story, because I've always find it very interesting how everybody gets started in this business and how they kind of zigzag their way to the position they are today. So Jeff, how did you get started?
Well, I guess if I go back far enough, being based in Detroit, the auto industry is in the blood, so to speak. But I remember growing up with, taking rides in the car with my parents and my dad. We drive by and the oncoming traffic, and he's calling out, "Oh, that's a '68, Thunderbird." The taillights were changed this year, and he's going on and on about all the details about all the vehicles, when I'm a young kid. So I think that was kind of set in stone of having an interest in that part of the industry. Mm-hmm. I then, after school, I got into more the numbers crunching part. So financial analysis, not the most exciting part of anything, but I'm a numbers guy. I really enjoyed it. I was working for an auto supplier here in Detroit area. And I was in the treasury group, and for some reason, instead of just doing cash management, which I was responsible actually for managing the cash of all of our Canadian operations, we also had a market share study of our seating business. So I worked for a seating supplier. Really didn't belong in this group. We were treasury, number geeks, and this allowed me to get on the other side of the business, is kind of looking at, it was analysis, but it was also looking at kind of the competitive landscape of what the future looks like. And I was a client of the company I'm now part of. So it was kind of once I got into that data and also the ability to look at the upcoming vehicles, so the future models, and kind of pay attention to that, pay attention to trends, what are people buying? Are they buying pickup trucks? Are they buying cars? Or that led me really into an interest in that part. And I left the financial analysis behind and jumped over to this side of the business, and really haven't looked back ever since.
That's so cool. I was kind of like you as a kid. I played that kind of similar game with my dad. For us, it was he'd even step it up one level. He'd be like, it'd be at night, and the cars would be coming on towards us, and he'd have to guess what car and year it was based on the headlights. And the closer it got to you, there were less points. The farther away, the better.
Right, so even you get a little grill maybe as you get closer.
Exactly.
Right?
Even today, I can still do it. It's crazy. Like I can be like dusk, so someone will just be kind of going down. From the distance, I'm like, yeah, that's a '93 Tercel. Yeah, that's horrible.
That's pretty impressive.
Can't even imagine there's one on the road still.
Or scary, I guess, to some.
Right. But it's so cool that you got to take the kind of that kid love for cars, and then your future passion for numbers. And I'm so glad that you have that passion. It's definitely not one of mine. But I do have to live and die by my numbers. I mean, when I was running my dealership, it's what literally gave me the direction of every single decision that I made, and it was from people much smarter than myself, like you, that helped me give me those insights of how I was going to direct my business in the direction that I was going to take it. In fact, actually, that's probably a great kind of start for today's podcast is what direction do dealers kind of take their business right now? There's, I guess we've got 2 months left right now, on the year. It's been a very interesting year. Q4 for us is always an interesting time anyways. And then we kind of tack on a pandemic and inventory levels. And there's a lot to try to kind of forecast what the rest of the year will be, definitely going into next year. So kind of what are your thoughts on kind of the global, or maybe even the regional or Canadian kind of outlook for autos kind of moving into the rest of this year and then going into the beginning of next year?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, why don't we start at the global level, since it's kind of interesting if you look at the different elements around the world. And I think what's fair to say is that where we are today is nowhere where we expected to be at the beginning of the year, pre-pandemic. But then also once we saw the pandemic take hold, and you're in the April timeframe, we were looking at a much more dire picture for the auto industry globally, as well as in North America and Canada specifically. So I think when we look at where the world is now, we've added back about 7 million units. So give you some perspective of kind of where we came from. Last year is about 90 million units globally, light vehicles. This year, we're now expecting about 77 million units. So we've increased the forecast from a low of 70 back in April. So good news is things are moving in the right direction. I suppose the I don't want to call it bad news, but maybe the wild card here is we just don't yet know what's fully ahead of us. I think the additional news that we've had over the past 2 weeks, and I think Pfizer ending on a positive note again, upping their success rate percentages, probably closer to the other one now. I think they're both right around 95%.
That's what I've seen the last few numbers have been.
Yeah, they're moving up. So I think that's all the good news for not only all of us personally, but for the industry as well.
It's interesting right now as we kind of look into that, because then I find the factor is kind of these rolling closures are creating kind of this regional effect, because I think geographically it just kind of depends on where you are, where these rolling closures are happening. I mean, I talk to people kind of all over the world, and it just depends on where you are. And then these regional rolling factors kind of eventually make their way into the national, and then the national is kind of slowly making its way into its global. I'm curious as far as inventory levels from a kind of a global perspective moving forward.
Sure.
Are we going to have enough cars? I guess that's my question. I guess that's the bottom question. Probably a lot of people are asking. Are we going to have enough cars?
It's a legitimate question, and I think when we look in North America, the answer to that is probably more of a depends, and it depends on what what a dealership is selling and what consumers are buying. So the cars, using that term specifically, we'll probably have enough cars, but pickups and SUVs, maybe not so much. So choice is still down on those. The ramp up since essentially the April shutdown that occurred in a lot of parts of the world it's gotten inventory back in line, but essentially the industry's been selling everything it can produce. So it really hasn't depleted further, but it hasn't built any inventory. The last month we started to see an edging of inventory levels back up, but at a very slow level. So I think we're starting to see that pattern turn positive as far as building that inventory back, so that dealers have enough stock to have choices for consumers to sell. And I think as we progress into next year, that's going to continue to improve. Realistically, we're probably not talking about normal levels of inventory until at least mid 2021, though.
Wow, mid 2021. I know a lot of dealers. Actually, that was some of the when you actually made that same comment in your previous speech recently. That's when I got a couple text messages. It was like, did he really just say that we're not going to get to normal inventory levels until the middle of 2021? Well, you know what though, I actually, this is more kind of a personal question for you, because I would love to kind of get your thoughts on knowing this, and at the end of the day, it is what it is, and I know there's a lot of unknowing factors, but look, I'm working with a lot of dealerships right now that are preparing their 2021 business plans. Like as usual, it's November, so it's time to start having those discussions. And there's just, I think a lot of dealers right now, especially a lot of ones that I'm consulting with, are really they're struggling to try to figure out, like, how do you make those changes for that model? Like, how do you adjust the model kind of based on this? What's some of the best advice you can give to dealers out there that are developing out their 21 business models, knowing what you know right now?
I guess I'd equate it to really what we do in forecasting, because essentially that's what you're doing. You're forecasting your business as you look at the upcoming year. The biggest piece of advice, and this may be obvious, but it's remain flexible, because you've got to kind of take in the new data points and reassess and readjust the plan as we get more information, because this is extremely fluid. It's been fluid in a positive way, but as you mentioned, we do have restrictions across good parts of the world, obviously in Canada, in the US. So I think with those restrictions come possible disruptions. And I think you have to kind of take those into account, and you have to readjust the plan accordingly. For example, if we were to get an inventory shortage again, if for some reason a specific plant or vehicle manufacturer had to shut down because of a case problem or some other unrelated issue, you've got to adjust those plans accordingly to know you're not going to get that inventory and you're not going to have those vehicles to sell, or you potentially could have a risk there. So I think it's remain flexible, but also, look at the drivers, look at what your customers are buying, and continue to stock in that space. So I think the easiest thing to do would be source more trucks, get as many trucks as you can. I think that's the easiest, maybe not the easiest, but the most obvious thing to do.
But well, you know what, we say that's most obvious, but I think that actually did hinder a handful or a fair amount actually of dealerships is during kind of that initial closing of just nobody kind of really knowing what this was and what this was going to look like, is a lot of businesses stopped. I know a lot of dealers that canceled orders, that postponed their normal ordering habits, and then other ones didn't. So in the last couple of months, there's been some dealerships that have definitely been positioned better than others because of how they ordered. Now, I think everyone's kind of learned that lesson a little bit about moving forward.
I think so.
No one's going to stop ordering. I don't think that's not going to be the case, right? But I love what you're saying, Jeff. I mean, in the past, we normally have kind of a plan A and maybe a partial plan B, but now it almost seems like we need to have kind of these what if plans. We almost going to have like an A, B, C, D. So it's like, if and that's, this happens, what do we do, right?
Do that, yeah. Yeah, you have to. We do, when we're forecasting, we have a series of scenarios, and we obviously have a base case. You have your plan, and then you have if this happens, this is the direction we have to go. If X happens, we've got to go in this direction. And I think remaining flexible and I think reading the current signs is going to be a good signal to a better 2021 at the end of the year. So there are going to be some surprises. I think we can count on that. We just don't know what they are.
So I'm curious. You may be able to answer this, you may not, but I'd just love to kind of get your thoughts on it too. And I love this idea. I love having an ABCD plan. And it's just sitting in the desk, and it's like, if this happens, we pull that plan out. And if this happens, pull this plan out. And this is both a financial plan and an operations plan. This year we've come accustomed to doing a lot with a little. I know a lot of dealerships are actually going to report some of the best years that they've had in a very, very long time, simply because the amount of labor expenses they've been able to decrease and still maintain a certain level of operations. I'm curious, from just your opinion, what ifs, would you put into place for a dealership to, develop out a strategy, maybe 2 or 3 what ifs that would execute on a certain plan?
Sure. Well, why don't we start with a positive one? And maybe this isn't a high probability, but I think you have to have a plan in place for an industry that is going to outperform expectations, whatever those might be. And I think that, that is probably tied around a vaccine. It's tied around maybe there's a better rollout of a vaccine and we get widespread inoculation of this sooner than expected, so that everyone is returning to some kind of normal activity in a faster pace. That's going to likely heat up the industry, heat up the economy, heat up the financial market. So all of that is probably pushing toward shortages again. So maybe beyond that first half of 2021. So you're in the second half, and you may have trouble getting vehicles if that's the case. So I think that's a potential
that's a good what if. Yeah, that definitely needs to be a scenario we need to talk about and develop out.
Absolutely. I think on the other side of that is, we have a slower period to get back to normal, and maybe that spills into 2022, and next year's kind of this on and off, hot and cold or bumpy path towards that normalcy. So I think you've got a plan, and that's probably the path that we're on right now. So maybe that's not as much of a scenario, but if you make some assumptions that some of these restrictions will cause more disruption to the sales model, And maybe it causes at some point, consumers have been extremely resilient. Maybe it causes consumers to pull back if things don't happen as quickly as they expect. So all this news about a vaccine, if consumers perceive and take that as, okay, well, this thing is over, we can go back to normal in January. I think that's going to be a kind of a wake up call for them, and it may cause some reactions or some different behaviors in the industry as it relates to purchasing large ticket items like vehicles.
No, I definitely think the confidence will kind of increase there. Ironically, the big ticket items have actually been very good for the last couple months. It almost kind of seems like the consumers patting themselves on the back. They're not taking those vacations like they did. They're definitely not going to be traveling for the holidays, which is as a significant expense. I have 3 kids. Going anywhere is not a small financial task by any means. Air travel is just not as big anymore. So it seems like that kind of seems to be the reward for a lot of them. It's like, well, let's just get the newer, better vehicle then, since we're going to be at home so much. So that's a plus. Now, I'm kind of curious if another what if, and I want to kind of get your thoughts on this. We seem to have this countdown. I think that's been pushed back now to June, when I guess the CERB will run out. And it almost kind of seems like that seems to be a countdown for when we will feel more of the economic squeeze of this all. If you guys have had discussions about how you kind of forecast that out, if this continues to stay on the path of its direction and the government's well of money dries out, what could that potentially look like?
No, it's a very good point. That is a scenario that we look at. Certainly the stimulus, again, looking around the world, you've got stimulus in virtually every location.
Every single country, I think, has done something,
right?
Yes.
Absolutely. So I think when you look at that, so you have two options here, really. You have it drying out at some point in the near future, meaning, say, 12 months, or you have the kick the can down the road scenario, and that eventually catches up with you as well. It's just a matter of when. So I think you've got to look at really both of those two elements. So maybe a scenario within a scenario, I suppose.
Yeah, it kind of is,
making
right?
it a little more complicated, but I honestly, I think that those are all possibilities, and it depends probably on locations. And, in some cases it might even be down to smaller local governments as well. But at some point, these packages have to be paid for. I don't think there's any question that some level of stimulus to keep the economy from completely tanking was in order. And maybe there's the need for it still. But I think at some point, we have to look at it that's got to be paid for, and that likely means a tax increase, some sort of a funding that allows that to be repaid.
Yeah, that's a good point. We may not actually feel the economic squeeze of this for 4 or 5, even plus years after, we've kind of gone through this. I guess it kind of just depends on that. I think what it is at the end of the day, dealers, if you're out there, you're watching and you're listening to this right now, is that have the bloody discussion. Let's not be reactive as an industry. And we do that a lot. It just kind of the way we've always been. Let's at least have a discussion. And then personally myself, all right, I'm under the belief that you have the discussion, you develop the plan, and you communicate that plan to your staff. Because right now I see a direct correlation with employee confidence and consumer confidence. The more confident our staff is, the more confident our consumers, our customers are coming through the doors are, and we'll continue to sell cars because of that confidence. But there's a stress of not knowing, not having a plan. Even if that plan never gets executed, dealers, you gotta at least have this conversation, decide what would you do from an operations perspective and a financial perspective if these milestones were to be hit, and store that away in your desk, but communicate it to your management team so that they are confident. They also know that if this happens, this is what goes next. I know this is a big topic for everyone, but there's still some other stuff I really want to talk to you about today too. So I won't go too much more on this. I'm sure we can do an entire podcast just on this topic. But one that's actually kind of been on my mind a lot lately, and in fact, I'm preparing to create kind of a series about it, is, electric vehicles and eventually self-driving and autonomous vehicles. But let's say for right now, electric vehicles, how does that kind of affect our industry with the current climate? And how does that kind of, what does that look like? What's the outlook look like for the next, I guess, the remaining of this year and going into next year?
Well, sure. I think, one of the things, if you look at it, it's hard to look at anything about the auto industry right now and not see those two letters EV associated with it.
Every
So
manufacturer's got something, if
everyone
not
has a
multiple.
plan. It's, it's the greatest vehicle ever. And their strategy is better than everyone else. So, which, that's absolutely fine. I think it's clear that's where the investment is headed, not just in North America, but most certainly globally. China has a substantial initiative to push their new energy vehicles, which essentially are EVs. Europe, from a regulatory standpoint, is really focused on that as well. In fact, I think that's where we see the majority of the growth and the substantial volume is going to be in Europe, followed by China. North America lagging behind to some extent, but definitely a long upward angle on their growth. So we do see a pretty substantial amount of growth. I think it's also interesting to note, if you look at the performance so far, EVs are substantially outperforming the rest of light vehicles
For sure.
during this downturn. So globally speaking, mainly because of the performance in Europe, EVs are actually positive to the year, where you've got the global market down. So it's
How are we doing here in Canada? Because I feel like Canadians, we kind of almost are in line with Europe as far as our embracing the technology.
well, performance isn't quite there as far as
Okay.
the outcome on the sales. So right now EVs are down actually just a hair more than the industry.
Hmm.
So it's not quite there. And this is coming from, last year they were actually pretty strong. You had some incentives that started out, and I think that got a lot of attention initially. Really in Canada specifically, and I'd throw the U.S. in here as well. Next 2 years are kind of critical as far as testing consumers to see how how big their appetite is for EVs, and
Sure.
does it go mainstream. You still have some issues that need to be solved. You have of course, range. Range is getting dealt with. We've seen range increase
Seems like it's getting
substantially.
better and better every model that they launch.
Exactly. Everybody's kind of one-upping the last one that's out there. So range, I would say, is probably not going to be the thing that holds people back. Battery life, certainly in cold weather, is an issue. You have the infrastructure, the charging infrastructure, and then the price point. Price point is something that can be dealt with again, with further government incentives. And I suspect that we'll see more action in that space
Hmm.
to help bring people into EVs. So that could be the jumpstart that the EV needs to really get over the next couple of years. There's a lot of new models coming out in the next couple of years, kind of fighting for right now, which is a pretty small piece of the pie.
There's some exciting models coming out,
There
and
are.
it almost kind of seems like it's kind of separated in kind of two different types of classes, right? Kind of find your more general consumer class. I think of like the F-150, the all electric
Sure.
F-150, where it doesn't look like an EV. You understand, like EVs kind of have like that look, that funky eyed jelly bean, and it's just like now we're seeing EVs that don't look like EVs. I mean, I don't know if I could, with the new F-150 coming out, I don't know if I could honestly tell the difference between the two if they were sitting side by side, unless I could see the logo or something along that lines. We have other manufacturers that are also putting out SUVs that they're fully electric, but they don't look like a typical electric vehicle. But then you got this other classification, which almost kind of like, I don't know what you want to call it, like uber luxury or more
Sure. Yeah.
high end. There's a lot of startups that are popping up, and it seems like almost every quarter you hear of like a new EV startup. So I'm actually kind of curious, just from your perspective, are there any startups right now that are kind of getting you excited?
There are. I think, you've got as you say, you've got a multitude of these, what I would call almost a boutique EV company, because
There you go. That's a great way to say it.
yeah, they've come in some cases out of nowhere, most of them not really out of nowhere, but they've popped up. They get funding. or they get listed and get funding. They develop a vehicle, but most of these companies haven't produced anything yet.
No, they haven't.
Or haven't even gotten anywhere near launching a vehicle. The closest is probably Rivian, who, COVID delayed their RT1 pickup. But it's going to launch early next year. So that is going to be the first one really out of the gate with a lot of buzz. There's a lot of attention that it's getting from a capability standpoint, from the fact that it is in a segment that consumers want right now.
I'm curious. And did you watch that Ewan McGregor series? Him and his friend take.
I didn't.
So
no.
Okay, you got to watch this. It's him and his friend take these. I think it's long way up, I believe. Yeah, it's long way up.
Okay.
And they start from the bottom of South America, and they work their way all the way up to LA, and they're riding electric Harleys. But then their trucks are Rivians, and it came out. I thought the timing was quite interesting when this series was released, and it really it highlighted. And I was kind of curious. I wonder if that was a good idea or not, because this could have gone really bad for them.
Yeah, if it didn't, that's brilliant marketing on Rivian's part as well to get it, get that out there before the vehicle launches.
It was, and it was a very, they even show it, it was VIN number 1 was what they literally put into the show. Wow. But you see the vehicle going through some extreme conditions, from heat to cold to water to just pretty much everything. So I agree with you. I think the Rivian kind of excites me. I'm not going to lie. The new Hummer, I got mixed feelings. I've actually been in an H1 several times and having an opportunity to drive one, and it's they're large and they're heavy and they're crude and they don't go crazy fast. And this is the polar opposite of everything that
everything a Hummer used to stand for, right?
It's just the polar opposite of it. Now, more on the mainstream, I guess we'll call it mainstream EVs and then boutique EVs. Any of the mainstream EVs that are coming out that get you all excited?
Yeah, I think another big launch is the Mustang Mach-E for Ford. So that one's going to be one to keep an eye on. Again, hitting a segment, so in more the crossover SUV space, but with a sporty angle, obviously trying to attach it to the Mustang name. Mustang enthusiasts might not love that. I know quite a few.
I don't think they will.
A little disappointed with the name linkage.
Yeah.
But I think the vehicle itself is a much more competitive product than we've seen in the past. So I think that's really the bottom line is the new generation of EVs, and frankly, we can thank Tesla for this because they really blazed the trail, creating products. First in car segments when people were moving away from cars, they still are buying Teslas. And now Teslas obviously have 2 models in the SUV space, and looking at that crazy Cybertruck as well at some point.
Talk about really pushing the envelope, huh?
Let's talk about something that maybe doesn't belong on this planet. Maybe Elon needs to send that up to Mars.
It looks like a Mars rover.
It does look like a rover, right? But I think we can give them a lot of credit for really bringing EVs mainstream and getting a lot of attention around them. And now where it goes from here, the rest of the industry certainly caught on and is pouring a lot of investment into EVs.
Aside from the pandemic, and I'm not trying to talk it down by any means, it is actually kind of an exciting time. There's some, this next 5 years for our industry, put aside the economics of everything, but just the leaps and bounds that are being made in technology and the consumer having so many choices. We just never had this before. And, the last 30 years, it's kind of been the same. We've improved our fuel efficiencies and we've improved the combustion engine, but there hasn't been something radically different that you can kind of grab onto. Now, look, from a dealer's perspective, from a consumer's perspective, I'm excited. And I've driven electric vehicles. Boy, being a sports car fan and just loving just big bored out V8s and loving that power, the power of of an electric motor is just, if you've never experienced it, it's literally sucks you in the seat,
Oh, it does. The torque is incredible, right?
It's insane. It's like a rocket. It's just if you get a chance to experience, guys, definitely recommend you go out and experience it. But there's a lot of dealerships out there that are looking at their manufacturers and they're not totally convinced that this was the right direction to go. I would love to kind of get your thoughts and opinion on how you see EVs may or may not positively or negatively affect the automotive dealer.
Well, I think because it's the vehicle of buzz right now, and I don't think that's going away. So I think if we use that as kind of the base, and let me go back a little bit. So I think for me personally, so I've been in the industry kind of tracking things. I guess it'll be 25 years coming up early next year.
Congrats.
So quite a long time. Congrats. And maybe it's a sickness, I'm not sure, but I enjoy it. But I used to be a kid in a candy store going to auto shows, as a younger analyst and kind of looking at everything and just getting excitement over the concept vehicles, over the new launches. And I would say the last 5 to maybe even 10 years, to your point earlier, is the industry is just kind of moving along, improving. The excitement just hasn't been there. And maybe that's because I've been doing this for a long time, but I think it's also because of what has become more of the financial pressure on the industry. And that's all the way down through the dealers, of course. So there's less interesting, exciting kind of passion drawing things that the industry has been, I think, part of. And I think as when we look at EVs and look at what that's doing and kind of look at where this industry is going, and I know AVs and mobility and all of that is certainly a little further out than we're going to talk about today. But this is an exciting time. This is arguably the most dynamic this industry has been in a very long time. So if we kind of translate that into kind of your question about EVs for the dealerships, and I think it's a positive. I think having that new hot EV that launches brings that excitement, brings that connection back to the consumer who is looking for something that excites them. And yeah, buying a new vehicle is always exciting. So I well, at least for me it is. Maybe not for everyone.
No, I agree. I think it's not something we do on a regular basis. It's a pretty big thing.
That process is a big deal, and you should get excited if you're going through that and buying a new vehicle. But I think when there's something that's more interesting and maybe different, even if that's not what you went in to purchase, it has a bit of that halo effect, I think, that a dealer can benefit from.
I agree. I definitely think that it's a reason to come visit.
It is.
Where the new models are great. The new designs are great. We're getting to the point where we'll start putting 65-inch screens in cars. Holy cow. I was in a Hyundai Elantra, a brand new one that just showed up, 2021, right? And the screen on this thing, it's a screen. There's no gauges.
Insane, right?
It's insane.
Yeah.
There's they're telling me in total there's 30 inches of screen in this thing. I'm like, huh? From a tech perspective, I agree with you that we've kind of almost maxed out as far as what we're going to do to get the traditional vehicle. But EVs do definitely have some excitement. I get excited because I'm a gearhead. I just start looking at the torque numbers,
right? And
it's just it's crazy. To get a vehicle that large to go that fast in that time frame is just crazy. But I think what a lot of dealerships are concerned about is the stress it puts on their operations. I think there's two parts to this.
Yep.
The current salesperson, they're not necessarily equipped to be able to explain this level of technology, I think effectively is one of their biggest concerns.
Absolutely.
Any thoughts you have on that?
No, 100% agree with you on that. I think that's certainly a risk at the dealership level. So there's probably, and I don't know, maybe your next section is going it from a service standpoint, but we'll start with the sales experience. I think you're absolutely right. Again, even if that buyer or consumer comes in not necessarily looking to buy that EV, but if the salesperson can't explain and articulate really what all of these, what are the benefits, what is the technology, I have a question. I'm a concern. I heard I'm supposed to be worried about range. Kind of getting him over that hurdle. So I think there's a lot, and this is education. This is training. These are different vehicles, and I think it's going to take a little bit more effort, probably at the dealership level, to make sure that the staff, certainly their sales staff, at least initially, is up to speed.
No, you're almost right. Like, what's kind of investment am I looking at training my staff to what the new technology is? And that's just the sales side, but then also the service side. Look, we struggle enough just to find service technicians that can deal with the current technology that's in vehicles, and that current technology has somewhat shifted, but it's been very similar for the last 20 years. Now you're going to literally remove the entire combustion engine and add a computer into it, and these technicians aren't, like, their hands are dirty. They move wrenches. If there's something they can't move a wrench into and they have to plug into to diagnose, what is that? There's a lot of dealerships that are concerned about that, and there's almost a kind of a fear to it. I'm going to sell this car. Fine, I can get my team up to speed where they can sell it,
right,
but then
right.
I don't have someone back there that's going to service it. And I know a lot of technicians aren't necessarily interested in learning. This is the problem I'm running into right now. A lot of technicians aren't interested in learning, all right, the technology requirements to service these vehicles, because there's just less work for them to do. So the education is huge on them, but the opportunity for them to generate money as a technician is a lot less. So I would love to kind of get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I completely understand and appreciate that from a dealership standpoint. I think it's a tough position to be in, but it's one that, those that are able to manage through that quickly and get ahead of it, I think are going to be out in front and have an advantage, because I think that is a big concern. Obviously, having the right technicians, you want to have the right technicians, but you're going to probably have to have a more variety of those type of technicians. So you may not be able to train every technician into the EV space and to be able to diagnose and fix and troubleshoot an EV. This is obviously, computers have been coming into vehicles for quite a long time. So I think that transition has already been occurring, but this takes it to a very different level by removing the engine completely and putting an electric motor in. And it's going to take likely not only training, but also additional resources, most likely in terms of technicians that have some of that experience. And then finding those technicians, that's the other challenge, I think, as we look at this and look at the expansion of EVs into the industry.
Yeah, definitely finding those individuals that, and also the other thing too is I actually think EVs challenges our current pay structures for a lot of our staff. I think from both the sales side, but even maybe more so on the service side, the requirements to be an expert in that space as far as a technician goes is the same as it is its counterpart as far as a combustion engine, but there's just less service work to be done on that. So then if our current pay plan is made off of piecework or a flat rate, all right, if there's just less work to do, then how do we compensate that? So there's just a lot of questions, just a lot of things that just, at the end of the day, it's kind of almost what we kind of talked about early on in our conversation. It's like, we got to have a plan. We got to at least have a discussion, because the manufacturer's not slowing down.
No, we know that, right? We know that's true. They're gonna put out what consumers want and what meets kind of the social norms and regulations, and the dealerships are gonna have to deal with that. So I think the sooner the industry and the dealer industry gets together and discusses some of these issues, and how are we going to have the right technicians in the space, and what is the model for pay or for charging for repairs on these vehicles? How is that going to differ than it did on an internal combustion engine? You have many fewer moving parts, fewer things to go wrong, but the things that do go wrong probably are much more expensive.
Very true. Very true. And I think, like I said, it's what we said at the beginning. Is we got to have a discussion around it. I just find too often in our industry that we just we let the chips fall, and then we oh no, let's reorganize everything and we'll move this person here, we'll move them over there, and we'll just kind of hope. But it's just, I think if anything you guys get from listening or watching this podcast is be proactive, all right? Have those plans in place. Your manufacturer's not slowing down the technology. EVs are one. That's just one thing that we even have to have discussions on. We have to have discussions around subscription models. I mean, how many manufacturers right now are working and building out technology within their own cars to support more of a subscription style model? It's just there are a lot of things on the horizon in our industry that we just need to start having discussions and creating plans about. Now, Jeff, I know it's towards the tail end of our time today, and this has been a lot of fun. I mean, we could easily do just a whole other podcast just on EVs. Actually, I've been invited to a launch. I'm gonna send you some information. I think it'd be fun to go with you to do one of these new EV launches. And
that'd be awesome. Yeah.
It would be a lot of fun. But hey, before I let you go though, for everyone out there that's watching and listening right now and would love to kind of connect with you and the company and learn more about what you guys do or kind of follow along with you, what's the best way to do so?
Sure. You can find us. Probably the easiest thing would be our website. We have a lot of information on there. We have a regular blog. So if you don't want to just listen to what I talk to you about with the industry, you can read about it. We've got a lot of smart analysts that are looking at different aspects of it. So that's it's lmc-auto.com. You can find us on Twitter. I'm on Twitter as well. JW Schust, SCHUST, and then it's LMC Auto. So we're active on there. We're active on LinkedIn as well. So we're on most of the social media sites. If trying to keep information out there and really we love nothing more than talking about the industry and keeping people informed.
No, I love following with some of you guys' content. You can tell there's a real deep-rooted passion and care for the industry.
I appreciate that.
And there's a wealth of information on their website. You got to check it out. Read some of the articles and the blogs. Very, very, very cool stuff. Again, Jeff, thank you so much for taking the time to jam with me today. This has been a lot of fun. You have yourself an amazing day.
Thanks, Jason. You as well. It's been fun.
Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to the Strategy Mob podcast with your host, Jason Harris. Don't want to miss new content? Be sure to sign up to be a mobster at strategymob.com to stay in the know. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe.